Joining me from Washington is Republican Senator Rob Portman. He was a House member from Ohio, President Bush's trade representative and budget director before winning his Senate seat in 2010. Yesterday, he was one of 6 Republicans to join with Democrats on a vote to extend, at least temporarily, unemployment insurance benefits. He was on Mitt Romney's vice presidential shortlist. Last year, he was the first sitting Republican senator to come out for gay marriage. Senator Portman, thanks for joining the show.
John, great to be on with you.
President Obama right now is attempting to negotiate 2 big trade deals, one with Europe, one with Asian countries. He's proposing a significant expenditure toward closing the skills gap, education and job training. The deficit has come down substantially over the last couple of years. What is your beef specifically with the president's economic policy right now, and what do you have to propose that's better?
Yeah, I think on each of those, John, there's a huge opportunity for America to move forward rather than, in the case of trade, be sitting on the sidelines. President Obama, as you know, is the first president since FDR not to have the ability to negotiate a trade agreement. It's called Trade Promotion Authority now. It's gone by different names over the years, but it's the ability to say to your negotiating partners, let's negotiate an agreement and then take it to Congress for an up or down vote. Without TPA, it's hard to imagine any trade agreement being passed. We've only passed one under that scenario.
But that's an issue where the president agrees with you. He's trying to get it.
Well, he has changed his mind on that. You're right. And about a year ago, and in his recent State of the Union, he did say that he is now for it. Until that time, actually, he was the only president, again, since FDR, not to be for it and not to try to achieve it. But, he has Democrat control here in the Senate, and yet he cannot get it to the floor of the Senate. And so the question is, John, is he promoting it in the way he should be with his own party? If he did that, it would pass the Senate easily. It would also pass the House easily, as you know, because Republicans generally support it.
And what about the other 2 things? That is the expenditure the president wants to make in education and training. Isn't that pointed in the right direction on the skills gap? And do you not give him credit for the fact that the deficit's come down?
Well, again, I think a great opportunity, as I said, in trade to be able to expand exports that we're not taking advantage of. We haven't been able to do that for, the entire administration. We haven't negotiated any new agreements with regard to the skills gap. Again, a great opportunity for us to take the roughly $15 billion a year that the federal government is spending on worker training, worker retraining, so within, workers who have lost a job to get the skills they need to access new jobs. There, the president has not shown leadership, and I think he can and should, and I think it can be bipartisan. I think you're referring more maybe to his pre-K proposals or other, education proposals.
Right.
But there's a great opportunity here to take that $15 billion and use it better. There are 47 different programs spread over 7 departments and agencies, and they're not working well. And we'll talk more about the deficit when we come back, but we have, over the last several years seen the highest deficits in the history of our country, to the point that we've added more debt held by the public than every single president in the history of the country combined.
I want to play a clip from Jeb Bush over the weekend discussing illegal immigration. We'll talk about it on the other side. Here's former Governor Bush.
I'm going to say this and it'll be on tape, and so be it. The way I look at this is someone who comes to our country because they couldn't come legally. They come to our country because their families, a dad who loved their children was worried that their children didn't have food on the table. And they crossed the border because they had no other means to work, to be able to provide for their family. Yes, they broke the law, but it's not a felony. It's an act of love. It's an act of commitment to your family.
Now, Senator, as you know, a lot of conservatives attacked Jeb Bush for saying that. Charles Krauthammer, the conservative columnist, said, why is Jeb Bush leading with his chin? What do you make of that, and what the Republican Party ought to do on illegal immigration? I know that even though there was a very strong vote in the Senate for a bill last year, you voted against it.
Yeah, I think Jeb's comment reminds me a little of what his older brother said, which is family values don't end at the Rio Grande, which I agree with. And, people are coming here, the vast majority of them, for economic reasons and trying to better their lives and help their families. I think that's true, and I think, that motivation is something that has to be considered in the immigration debate. I also think that we have to have an immigration system that works. So, we are a nation of immigrants. We're proud of that heritage. It's an incredibly important part of the fabric of our country, and I think it's one reason our country has been singularly successful on, growing jobs and creating opportunity. But we're also a country of laws, and we just need to have a fair system that's in place. So I don't think what Jeb said is inconsistent with having smart immigration reform that deals with a broken system. I did not support the Senate bill for a very simple reason, and that's because I don't believe that the enforcement measures in that legislation were adequate or would work. And specifically, I believe at the workforce level, at the workplace, you have to have effective enforcement. I think that is the magnet that draws people, because I do believe people come here, the vast majority of them, to better themselves and to get a job. I agree people are coming here with good intentions to help their families and to help themselves to become economically successful, and that's what has driven, again, so much of our greatness as a country. But the question is, shouldn't there be an immigration system that is fair, so people who are waiting in line, say in Mexico, and doing so legally, are not disadvantaged as compared to those who come illegally? We have to have laws in place that make sense. If we don't do something at the workplace to make it more difficult for people to get a job, I do not believe that we will be able to solve this problem. In fact, I don't think people are going to come out of the shadows, John, if they are in a system where they can work without penalty. I know my colleagues on both sides of the aisle who supported this bill may disagree with me on this, but I think if you ask someone to come forward, pay a fine, ask that person to pay back taxes, ask that person to register, to even learn English in some cases, as opposed to simply continuing to work here illegally without any penalty, I think many people will continue to work, because I don't think all of them are looking for citizenship. Many are looking for just the ability to do exactly what we said earlier, which is to make some money and often to send it home to their family. So I think you need to have an effective workplace enforcement mechanism. There is one. I suggested it. I tried to get it on the Senate floor. I was not able to. I know Paul Ryan and others are interested in that in the House legislation. There was better workplace legislation enacted in one of the committees in the House. And I think that is the key here, is to stop that magnet. Yes, we need to have a secure border for all sorts of reasons, because of drugs and because of guns and because of terrorism and so on. I agree with that. But ultimately, if there is that magnet of the workplace, it will be impossible for us to have an immigration system that works.
Senator, I want to go to one of our callers. We've got Eric on the line from Somerville, Massachusetts. Eric, welcome to the show. What's your question for Senator Portman?
Hi, John.
Hey, Eric.
I got a master's degree 3 years ago, and I still do not have a full-time job. And I only see the Republicans trying to take away health insurance for people with pre-existing conditions, and low taxes for rich people, and not helping people like myself have full-time secure jobs so we can have the same opportunities that our parents had. And I want to know what Senator Portman and the rest of these Republicans are going to do to try to help the people in this country instead of talking about the 47%.
Yeah,
Senator?
Great question, Eric, and I totally agree with you. And look, I gave a talk on the floor last night about this. We have a quiet crisis in this country, and that's people who are out of work. We have, as you know, record numbers of people who are long-term unemployed. That's over 6 months, both with regard to the recession and even in this recovery. Right now in this recovery, we have more people long-term unemployed than we've ever had in any recession in our nation's history, with the exception of this most recent one. And then we have over 10 million people who have left the workforce altogether. So Eric is still, it sounds like you're looking for a job and you're still counted on those unemployment numbers. But frankly, the 7% unemployment, whatever that number is today, is not accurate, because it doesn't count a record number of men. And when you include men and women back to the 1970s, the Jimmy Carter era, which an economy we don't want to replicate, being totally disconnected from work, not even looking for work, much less in the workforce. So we've got some real problems now, and it sounds like you're sort of blaming Republicans for it. I would say, what the president has done over the last several years has not worked to take the economy out of what admittedly was a very tough situation. This has been the weakest economic recovery on record. We've never had an economic recovery like this.
Did what President Bush did economically work?
Well, part of what happened after the 2001 recession is that he did put in place policies that got the economy moving again. Now, we had the mortgage crisis and we obviously had the financial crisis, but if you look at the so-called jobless recovery, John, after the 2001 recession, remember people talked about that? It turns out at this point, after the 2001 election, we had already created millions of new jobs. We haven't created, until this last month, a single new job. And maybe now we have in the private sector. When you add private and public together, we still haven't created any net new jobs since the recession. That's never happened before. So, you can look at what happened in 2008 and 9, but also, acknowledging that financial crisis was a very deep recession, but also look at our other recessions, including 2001, going back to 81, 82, which was actually a deeper recession in terms of the unemployment numbers. But by this time, we'd created 7 or 8 million new jobs. We aren't doing that now. So to Eric, I would say two things. One, let's look at ways to actually create economic growth generally. John Kennedy used to say famously, a rising tide lifts all boats. We need to do that, and that's where we have this jobs plan where I laid out earlier, dealing with issues like tax reform and trade, as we talked about, expanding exports, dealing with this skills gap in a much more aggressive way to reform the current program to make it work better. And then let's also deal with the specific issue that Eric mentions. In other words, dealing with health care in a way that doesn't have this big increase in cost, but does provide for people with pre-existing conditions. The high-risk pools, in my view, are something we ought to have as part of a health care solution. But it can be done, and it can be done, through providing incentives and through providing subsidies at the state level. There'll be a federal involvement here in terms of subsidizing it. And let's do something to provide more access to health care. My own view is we ought to give people who are not in employees health care plans, so they aren't working for a company that provides health care, the same sort of tax benefits so that they could have a tax credit to go out and buy health care. I think you then would find there'd be more transparency, more competition, more choice, and you're going to see a better health care system at the end. In this current environment we're living in now, one, we have obviously a lot of frustration with how to deal with the Affordable Care Act, how to get coverage, but also higher costs.
Senator,
choice.
I don't want to cut you off, but I want to keep my word to your staff because I know you've got another appointment. So I want to thank you for joining us. We will look forward to seeing how your jobs plan fares over the coming months.
Great. Thanks for having me on, John. Good to talk to you as always.
You bet.